I came home that night expecting dinner. What I got instead was the beginning of the end. The lights were on, the house was quiet, and my wife's phone was buzzing face down on the counter like it was hiding something. That's the moment I knew my world wasn't just cracking. It was about to explode. What followed changed everything: my marriage, my business, even who I was as a man. And by the end of this story, you'll see how I took it all back, piece by piece. But first, let me take you to the night it all began. My name's Ron Winters. I'm 52 years old, and I built Ironwood Forge, my heavy equipment contracting company in Spokane, Washington, from nothing but grit and 18-hour workdays. I've been married to Cheryl for 15 years. That same amount of time I've called Wayne Hoffman my best friend. We were tight. He was the godfather to my son, stood next to me at my wedding, and helped bail me out when the bank nearly closed our first yard. We were solid, I thought, until that Tuesday evening when I came home a little earlier than usual. I'd been chasing a deal that could double the size of our company, the Patterson contract. Cheryl had been acting off for weeks, distant, cold, always clutching her phone like it held secrets. That night I noticed something I hadn't before. It wasn't what she said, it was what she didn't. The way her eyes dropped when I walked in, the forced smile, the kind of silence that doesn't come from comfort, it comes from guilt. I didn't know it yet, but this was the start of something darker than I ever imagined. Something that would force me to question everything I believed about loyalty, marriage, and friendship. And what I'd uncover next would gut me. It started with the little things, the ones that don't scream, just whisper. Cheryl used to meet me at the door, ask about my day, smile when I walked in, covered in diesel dust and dry concrete. Lately, all I got was silence and the soft clink of her fork on a reheated dinner plate. The kind of silence that makes a man feel like a ghost in his own home. We'd been married for 15 years. I'd been through the ups and downs with her, and early miscarriage nights spent in ERs, when Thomas was little tight bank accounts and tighter schedules. We'd survived all of it, or so I thought. But lately something had shifted, and now that I look back, the signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them. It's funny how a man like me, who spent his life reading blueprints and job specs, could miss the clearest layout right in front of him. Her phone always flipped screen down. The new perfume she wore on Thursday nights, claiming it was for book club. The subtle flinch she gave when I walked into a room too quickly, like she was hiding something. It wasn't obvious. That's what made it dangerous. It crept in like rot behind drywall, unseen until everything's already compromised. And then there was Wayne, my best friend of 15 years. He and I met back on a construction site in 2010. He was a site manager. I was doing heavy equipment, subcontracting. We clicked instantly, talked motorcycles over break-shared beers after long days. When I started Ironwood Forge, 3 years later, Wayne was the first guy I called. He believed in me before anyone else did, even put in $30,000, most of his savings, for a 15% stake. In those first years when Cheryl and I were still living in a one-bedroom rental with a busted heater, Wayne was right there, grinding it out with me. He stood by me when my dad passed, when the bank called me son while denying my loan, when Cheryl and I were praying for a second child. So when Cheryl and Wayne began acting strangely, I shoved the thoughts down. Loyalty like that didn't just disappear. Not overnight. Still, I started keeping track. Not in a dramatic way. I didn't go through her purse or tail her car. But I watched. Paid attention. At our last barbecue, I noticed how her laugh changed when Wayne told a joke, how she touched his arm a little longer than necessary. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe I was tired, or jealous, or imagining things because I'd been working too much. After all, we were chasing the Patterson deal, and that meant 18-hour days and back-to-back meetings. If I wasn't showing up at home the way I used to, that was just the cost of progress, right-wrong. Trust is like scaffolding. You don't notice the weakness until it collapses. One Thursday night, I got home a little earlier than usual. Cheryl wasn't there. Her book club nights had become routine, and I never questioned them. But that evening I noticed something strange. A faint scent of Wayne's cologne lingering in the hall. His cologne. I remembered it because I gave it to him last Christmas. He said it reminded him of the shop his grandfather used to take him to as a boy. Funny how something so sentimental could turn sour so quickly. I didn't say anything. I just stored it away like a mental post-it note. The following week, I installed a GPS tracker on my own home security system. Nothing illegal, nothing drastic, just enough to check logs. I wanted to know who was coming and going during the day. After work, I logged in. Wayne's truck had been parked in my driveway 3 times in the past 10 days, always in the early afternoon, always when I was at job sites. Once that's a coincidence, twice, strange, 3 times, that's intention. The pit in my stomach turned into something hard and cold. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. I knew if I said the wrong thing too early, they'd just hide it better. I needed clarity, not suspicion. The final straw came at dinner one Saturday night. We were at a steakhouse. Our son Thomas had come home from college, and I figured a nice meal might help clear the air. Cheryl looked beautiful, dressed up in a way I hadn't seen in months, but she barely looked at me the entire night. Every time her phone buzzed, she smiled down at it, like it held the world's secrets. I asked who it was, casually. She answered too fast. Jennifer from book club. She even laughed after, but it sounded rehearsed. Thomas was mid-conversation about his engineering program when I excused myself and went to the restroom. In truth, I just needed a breath, a moment alone to figure out how the hell everything I'd built was slipping away without making a sound. That night after Thomas had gone to bed, I stood in our kitchen and watched Cheryl doing dishes. She used to hum while she did that. Now it was just soap and silence. I asked her a question I hadn't dared to until then. Is there something going on with you and Wayne? She didn't look surprised. She just paused, then said, "You're always working late." Not no. Not that I was crazy. Just a redirect. That's when I knew, truly knew. And once a man knows, he can't unknow. From that moment on, something inside me shifted. Not rage, not even heartbreak, just cold, focused calculation. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to prepare. Because if they had spent months building a betrayal, I could spend days building a response they'd never see coming. And the very next morning, I made the first call that would change everything. The next morning, I sat at my desk in the Ironwood Forge office, watching the sun crawl up behind the loading yard. The same yard I built with my own hands 15 years ago, pouring concrete until my knuckles bled and working night shifts so I could afford payroll. That morning, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Everything had a shadow to it. My office, once a place of pride, now felt like a bunker. And all I could think was if they were going to take my loyalty and burn it, I'd make sure they didn't walk away unscathed. I didn't waste time. I called Harold Kessler, my corporate attorney, and the man who helped draft the original partnership agreement when Wayne and I started Ironwood. We met in his downtown office that same afternoon. He offered coffee. I declined. I didn't want small talk. I wanted firepower. I placed a manila folder on his desk, screenshots of texts from Cheryl's phone, GPS logs showing Wayne's truck, parked at my house, while I was at job sites, emails I'd retrieved from our shared laptop. He didn't need to ask why I was there. One look at the folder, and he went straight to the point. You want to trigger Article 7. Article 7 was a clause I insisted on 15 years ago, an internal safety net. in case either partner ever compromised the company's reputation. We'd included it for things like DUIs, gambling debts, public scandals. I never thought I'd use it because of a personal betrayal. But reputation is reputation, and Wayne had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Harold warned me, "You'll be buying him out at 20 cents on the dollar. It'll get ugly." I nodded. It's already ugly. That night I didn't go home. I stayed in a hotel across town and booked the room for 3 nights in advance. Cheryl didn't call. She didn't text. Maybe she thought I needed space. Maybe she thought she could spin it. But I wasn't leaving breadcrumbs. I was building a wall. I returned to the house each morning like clockwork, cordial, emotionless. Slept in the guest room. Never asked where she'd been. She seemed unsure how to read me. That worked in my favor. Let her wonder. But during business hours, I was assembling my counterattack. Quietly, methodically. Every ironwood contract, every client agreement, every operational document Wayne had touched. Over the years, I reviewed it. I was looking for weaknesses, and that's when I found something I wasn't expecting. Discrepancies. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens. Equipment billed to projects that didn't match usage logs. Vendor invoices that looked inflated. Credit card statements that had weekend expenses listed under job codes. Over 3 years, it added up to $173,000. I called our accountant, had him run a parallel audit privately. Within 2 days, he confirmed my suspicions. Wayne hadn't just crossed the line with Cheryl, he'd been stealing from the company too. This was my moment of clarity. They didn't just betray my trust, they tried to dismantle my legacy, and I wasn't going to let it stand. I printed the final paperwork and made the call to Wayne, told him I needed to discuss the Patterson expansion, asked him to meet me after hours, just us. He agreed, as casually as ever. When he walked into the office that evening, he looked like the same guy I'd stood next to at my wedding. Flannel shirt, denim work jeans, and the leather jacket I bought him for his 50th birthday. That was the part that stung most. He looked exactly the same, but I wasn't seeing the same man. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait?" he said, dropping into the chair across from my desk. I didn't answer. I simply slid the folder across the table. Inside were the Article 7 dissolution papers, the buyout terms, and the proof. Wayne flipped through the documents, and I watched his face transform confusion, then disbelief, then anger. "What the hell is this?" he said. "Article 7. You're kicking me out over Cheryl." I kept my voice even. "No. I'm enforcing a contract over actions that damage our reputation. You knew what you were doing." He leaned forward, trying to soften his tone. "Look, I know things have been rough between you two." She was lonely, Ron. That's all it was. It just happened. 15 years of friendship, and that was the excuse. "So it's my fault," I said flatly. Wayne pushed the folder back. "I'm not signing this. You can't force me out over something personal. Actually, I can. Section 3, paragraph 2. Read it again." He looked down, eyes scanning the fine print he'd signed a decade and a half ago without a second thought. His jaw tightened. "You planned this." "No," I said. "I protected what was mine." This was the turning point. I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I was resolved. If you've ever had to stay calm while confronting someone who stabbed you in the back, hit like, and drop a comment. Tell me how you handled it. And if you haven't yet, take notes. This is how you take your power back. Wayne stood slamming the chair behind him. "Cheryl won't stand for this. She'll back me." I nodded. "You should call her." And just like that, he stormed out, dialing as he left, unaware that Cheryl was about to learn just how deep this went and what it was really going to cost her. By the time I leaned back in my chair, the adrenaline had worn off. But what replaced it wasn't peace. It was anticipation. Because the next move, that would be hers. The next morning I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the front door fly open like it belonged to someone else. Wayne barged in his face, red jaw-clenched eyes wild like a man who'd just lost control of the narrative. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He stormed in like he still had a place here. "What did you say to her?" He barked, slamming his palm against the counter hard enough to rattle the mugs in the drying rack. I didn't answer right away. I poured my coffee, slow and calm, like I had all the time in the world. Who I asked, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted him to say her name out loud. "Cheryl." He growled it, like it was stuck in his throat. "She's not answering my calls. Her sister said she left town yesterday." "What did you tell her?" I took a sip, savoring the heat and quiet. "Maybe she needed time to think," I said. That made him snap. "Don't play games with me, Ron. You threatened her, didn't you? Told her to choose between me and your money." His voice cracked on that last word, money like he was just starting to realize what this really cost him. That's when I set the mug down and looked him in the eye. "I didn't threaten anyone, Wayne. I showed her what I showed you, the partnership dissolution, and our prenup." He blinked, thrown off balance. "Prenup, that thing's 20 years old. It still holds," I said, "especially the infidelity clause." His entire expression shifted. He didn't even try to hide the panic. "What clause?" "The one that says if either party commits adultery, they forfeit all rights to community property acquired during the marriage, including any stake in Ironwood Forge." The room went dead silent. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at me, mouth slightly open, breathing like he'd just been punched in the gut. I left the kitchen and walked down the hall to my home office. Unlocked the bottom drawer of my file cabinet, pulled out the original prenup, and laid it flat on the desk. Both our signatures, both sets of initials, and an amendment that was never contested. "You're lying," he said behind me, but his voice lacked conviction. I pointed to the section. "It's all there." He read it, shoulders slumping the longer he stared. "You've been planning this for 15 years, he finally said. No, I told him. "I've been protecting what's mine for 15 years. There's a difference." He sank into the armchair across from my desk, the fire in him burning out like wet kindling. "So that's it," he said. "You're taking everything from both of us." "Not everything," I replied, "just what you tried to take from me." But I wasn't finished. While he was busy wrecking my home, I'd been digging deeper. I slid another folder across the desk. Inside were copies of vendor statements, rental logs, credit card records, the full audit. His fingers trembled as he flipped through it. "What's this?" he asked. "That's your expense account audit from the past 3 years. Our accountant found $173,000 in unaccounted transactions. You were charging equipment to jobs that didn't exist. Inflated invoices, personal travel buried in business statements. That's embezzlement, Wayne." He went pale. "I was going to put it back," he muttered. "I just needed some time." "With what money?" I asked. "You were already bled dry from the divorce." "Then you needed a down payment for that new house. And let me guess, you started dipping deeper so you could impress her. Dinners, gifts, weekend getaways." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. "Here's the part. I want you to think about what would you do in my position. Would you press charges? Would you let it go? Drop a comment and tell me how far would you go when someone you loved stabbed you in the back and stole from your business too?" Wayne finally looked up, his voice barely audible. "What are you going to do?" "That depends," I said, tapping the folder. "You sign the dissolution papers and this never sees the light of day. You walk away quietly, and I don't take this to the district attorney. But if you fight me, I will bury you under every piece of proof I've got." He didn't argue. He just sat there, defeated, as if the weight of his decisions had finally come crashing down. He stood slowly, gathered the papers, and walked out without another word. And I knew he'd sign, not because he wanted to, but because now for the first time he had no cards left to play. That night the house was quiet again, not the suspicious kind of quiet, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. I stepped out onto the back porch and looked up at the stars, the kind of sky you don't see when you're too busy holding your world together with both hands. Inside, Cheryl's things were still in place. Her favorite sweater draped over the couch, the scent of her shampoo still faint in the bathroom. But for the first time, I didn't feel tied to it all. I felt free. The next day I started phase 2, because if they thought this was the end, they hadn't seen anything yet. I gave Wayne 24 hours to sign the dissolution papers. He did it in 12. I didn't hear from him again, not a phone call, not a knock on my door. I figured he was busy licking his wounds, or trying to spin some version of the story where he wasn't the villain. But I wasn't interested in his version. I was focused on mine. That same morning, I drove to our lawyer's office and officially executed the buyout. Wayne's 15% stake in Ironwood Forge was now mine, acquired for a laughable 20 cents on the dollar, based on the valuation we'd recorded before the Patterson contract hit. He walked away with $120,000. On paper, that might sound like a win for him. But behind the scenes, the real numbers told a different story. Because what Wayne didn't know was that I'd already called Patterson Construction and secured a private meeting with the CEO. I sat down, with him personally explained the internal restructuring, reassured him that Ironwood Forge was stable, and gave him my word that our performance wouldn't skip a beat. Mr. Patterson didn't blink. "We hired you, Ron," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Not your company." In that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. The clients, the success, the contracts, it was never about the logo. It was about me. The relationships were built on my name, my reputation, my late nights and early mornings. I wasn't just a partner in Ironwood Forge. I was the damn foundation. Over the next 3 days, I met with every major client we had, one by one. No assistants, no middlemen, just me, and a handshake across a table. I brought new contracts, revised, cleaner, stronger, and every single one of them signed. By the end of the week, I had secured over 80% of our annual revenue, under my name tied directly to my leadership, and not to Wayne or even the Ironwood brand. By the time Wayne finished packing up his office, I'd made him irrelevant. Do you know what that kind of silence feels like? When someone who once walked into every room like they owned it, now can't even get eye contact from the receptionist. That's not revenge. That's justice in slow motion. If you've ever had to rebuild something after betrayal, especially something you poured your whole life into, drop a comment and tell me how you did it. And if you haven't yet, but you're still standing after someone tore you down, hit that like button. Because surviving is the first win. Rebuilding is the second. On Friday, I got a text from Cheryl's sister. Just 4 words, she's back in town. That evening, Cheryl pulled into the driveway like she was stepping into a memory. Same car, same hesitation. She walked up to the porch like it belonged to someone else. I was in the backyard, splitting firewood. She stood there for a long time before finally speaking. "We need to talk," she said. I set the axe down and turned slowly. About us. About what happens next. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. She'd practiced this conversation in the car, maybe even all week. I let her speak. She went on about how people make mistakes, how marriages go through rough seasons. She talked about healing, about counseling, about second chances. But I had already given her all the silence and space I was willing to. "I filed the divorce papers 2 days ago," I said. Your copy is on the kitchen counter." She blinked. "Just like that, you're throwing away 15 years. You already threw it away," I said. "I'm just cleaning up the mess." The crack in her voice when she asked, "What about the house?" wasn't out of sadness, it was calculation. She'd moved from emotion to logistics, realizing the game was ending. I told her to speak with her lawyer and that she should take another look at the prenup before assuming she was entitled to half. She froze. "That old document won't hold up." "It will," I said, "and it does." That's when the full weight of it started hitting her. The cabin, the retirement accounts, the business, everything we'd built was now shielded behind signatures she'd forgotten she made. She'd chosen Wayne, thinking it was a side path, but it had been an exit ramp. "You're really doing this," she whispered. "No," I said, picking up the next log. "You already did it. I'm just finishing it." She didn't cry. Not then. She just stood there, stunned. I think the hardest part for her wasn't the divorce or the money. It was realizing that I wasn't angry anymore, that I didn't care enough to argue. Indifference is colder than rage and more permanent. As she walked back to her car, I didn't stop her. I didn't offer comfort. She drove away without a word, and for the first time in months, the house felt still. Not empty, not bitter, just still. The next morning, I made another phone call, because while the divorce was in motion and Wayne was out of the picture, I wasn't done. There was one more move to make, one more door to open, one I hadn't considered before, but now it made perfect sense. By the time Cheryl's taillights disappeared down the street, I already had the next step in motion. I wasn't just tying up loose ends. I was closing a chapter for good. The morning after she left, I drove to Driftshade Limited, a regional construction giant that had been expanding aggressively across eastern Washington. A few years ago, I wouldn't have considered a meeting with their CEO. Back then, I was too busy building Ironwood Forge, too loyal to something I'd poured half my life into. But loyalty had cost me dearly. This time I was thinking differently. Arthur Bowman, Driftshade's CEO, greeted me with a firm handshake and that kind of grin that only seasoned builders carry, grizzled, no nonsense, and straight to the point. We sat down across from each other at a conference table with a stack of draft agreements between us. I'd reached out 2 weeks earlier, shortly after forcing Wayne out. I'd floated the idea of an acquisition, not just a buyout, but a full transfer of Ironwood Forge's assets, contracts, fleet, and client portfolio. The only condition I'd stay on as division president for 2 years to ensure a smooth transition. After that, I'd walk away clean. Arthur pushed the agreement toward me. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "You built Ironwood from nothing." I looked him in the eye. "That's exactly why I'm selling it. Because I know what it's worth, and because I know when it's time to let go." The deal on the table was for $17 million, twice what Ironwood had been valued at, even after we landed the Patterson contract. The weight of that number didn't even hit me at first. All I could think was how different this felt from every other milestone in my life. It wasn't triumph. It was clarity. Most people think revenge is about screaming matches or slashed tires or taking something back. But sometimes revenge is quiet. It's shaking hands in a boardroom while the person who wronged you is still piecing together what they lost. If you've ever taken back control of your life in a way that surprised even you, drop a comment. And if you haven't yet hit that like button, because knowing your worth is the first step. Just as I was about to sign, Arthur's secretary popped in. "There's someone here to see you, Mr. Winters." "A Mr. Hoffman." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Wayne Hoffman." I didn't flinch. "Send him in." Wayne stepped into the room with the look of a man who thought he still had options. He looked around the boardroom, took in the contracts, the executives, the legal team, and finally landed on me. "You sold it?" he asked, stunned. Without even offering me the chance to buy back in, I stood-buttoned my jacket and handed Arthur the signed agreement. "I don't owe you offers," I said. "You sold your integrity the day you walked into my house when I wasn't home." Wayne's face contorted. Shock first, then fury. "You're a bastard. You know that." I turned back, slowly looked him dead in the eye. "Careful, Wayne. You're standing on very thin ice as it is." He took a step forward, voice trembling. 17 million. You sold it. For 17 million. I gave you 30 grand and half my career. No, I said, my voice low. You gave me 30 grand. Then you took my wife, stole from my company, and lit your reputation on fire. What you lost wasn't mine to protect. The room was silent. Every Driftshade executive sat stone-faced, watching what felt less like a business deal and more like a reckoning. Wayne's fists were clenched. He looked like a man realizing too late that he bet everything on the wrong hand. "I'll sue," he muttered. "You already signed," I said. "You signed away your shares. You signed the Article 7 clause. You signed the NDA. And if you try to drag this through court, I'll release the audit and let the DA decide what to do with the embezzlement report." That broke him. He stood there, hands at his sides, shoulders caving in. The man I used to call brother was gone. All that was left was a hollow shell of ego and regret. Arthur leaned over and whispered, "That was something to watch." I smiled. It was overdue. Wayne left without another word. No parting shot, no defense, just the echo of his boots down the hall. And with that, the deal was done. Ironwood Forge now belonged to Driftshade Limited, the company that once carried my name. My blood and every ounce of sweat I had was gone. But what I walked away with wasn't just a payout. It was perspective. The freedom to live life on my own terms with nothing tied to lies, betrayal, or past debts. That's a kind of wealth most people never reach. On the drive home, I didn't feel sadness. I felt weightless, not empty, just unburdened. And as I pulled into the driveway of my cabin that evening, I knew the war was over. But life, as it always does, had one more twist waiting. One I never expected, and one that made me reevaluate everything I thought I'd closed the door on. 6 weeks after signing the deal with Driftshade, I stood on the deck of my new cabin, overlooking the Columbia River. Not the vacation cabin Cheryl got in the divorce, the real one. A place I chose for myself on land I paid for, outright, with money they never thought I'd have. The air was clean, the mornings were silent, and my hands had finally stopped trembling when I poured my first cup of coffee. I'd survived the storm, but what I didn't expect was what came next. It was a Saturday morning when the text came through. "Thomas, my son, coming home this weekend. Dinner." I stared at that message for a long time longer than I needed to. I typed back, "Always free for you," and felt something in my chest loosen. Through it all, Cheryl Wayne, the business, the betrayal. Thomas had been the one thing that stayed true. He never asked questions he didn't need answers to. He never chose sides. He just watched, quietly, carefully, like he was waiting to see who I'd become. When he arrived that evening, he looked older. Not just because of his time at college, but because of everything that had unfolded since Christmas. He stepped out of his car, walked over and hugged me in that strong, grown man kind of way. We didn't talk about the divorce. We didn't talk about Wayne. We just grilled steaks on the back deck and watched the sun drop behind the hills. After dinner, we sat with beers in hand, and he finally broke the silence. "You doing okay?" I nodded. "Better than I should be." He looked down at the bottle in his hand, rolling it between his palms. "Mom called me a few weeks ago." I didn't flinch. "What did she say?" She asked if I hated her. That hit harder than I expected. "And what did you tell her?" I said I didn't. "But that I was disappointed in both of you." I took that one straight to the gut. Fair. He looked at me. You don't seem angry anymore. I'm not, I said. Not really. You spend enough time being angry. It starts owning you. Do you still love her? He asked, not like a son trying to pry, but like a man needing to understand what love actually means. I stared out at the river. The way it moved, strong, steady, indifferent. I loved who I thought she was. I don't think that person ever really existed. If you've ever had to accept that someone you loved wasn't who you thought they were, leave a comment and tell me how you let go. Or hit, like if you're still trying. Thomas stayed the night. He asked about the Harley I was restoring, out back my old dream from when I was 19, and broke. We spent Sunday morning in the workshop, pulling the engine apart, covered in grease and the kind of silence that only exists between men who don't need to say everything out loud. After he left that afternoon, I stood alone in the garage, hands black with oil, and thought about what he said, about disappointment, about not being angry, and I realized he wasn't just asking about Cheryl. He was asking about who I had become. That night I got curious. I opened my laptop and did something I hadn't done since this all started. I looked up Cheryl. Nothing major, just a quick search, a few clicks. No social media updates, no photos. But then I checked LinkedIn of all places, and there she was. New city, Seattle, or new job office manager at a mid-size architecture firm. New name, she'd dropped my last name completely. Part of me expected to feel something. Bitterness, regret, maybe even pride. But all I felt was distance. Like I was reading about someone I used to know in another life. Then almost by accident, I searched Wayne. What I found was worse than anything I could have planned. He'd launched a startup, some small-time equipment rental service, operating out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. A bare-bones website, generic logo, nothing special. But the part that stood out was the About page. He called himself a veteran industry expert, claimed 20 years of leadership in construction logistics. No mention of Ironwood Forge, no mention of a past. Just spin. I picked up my phone not to call anyone, but to remind myself that I didn't need to. The industry already knew the truth. Word had spread. Our clients were loyal. The contractors talked. Vendors gossiped. The truth always travels faster than you expect when you've built your name on trust. If you've ever watched someone rewrite their history to escape accountability, I want to hear about it. How did you handle it? Did you speak up or stay silent and let the world figure it out? As the sun sank behind the ridge and the night settled in, I sat out on the porch with a glass of the same whiskey I hadn't touched since the night I found Wayne's jacket on my bed. I poured one finger and took a sip, not out of celebration, not out of pain, just peace. But peace is fragile, because the next morning I opened my inbox and saw an unexpected message waiting, one that didn't come from Cheryl, one that didn't come from Wayne. It came from someone I hadn't heard from in over a decade, and it changed everything I thought was finished. The email subject line read, "Catching up long time." No name, just that. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, or one of those awkward reunion invites people send out when they realize the past is quieter than they'd hoped. But something about the phrasing made me click. It was from Diane, Wayne's ex-wife, the one who'd left him a year before everything imploded. I hadn't heard from her in over a decade, not since their wedding anniversary dinner in 2013 when Cheryl and I brought over a bottle of wine, and Wayne grilled steaks out back, like we were all untouchable. Her message was short but sharp. "I know we haven't spoken in a long time. I heard what happened, some of it anyway. I'm sorry. I also think we need to talk. There are things I should have said years ago." I sat there for a long time, staring at those words. Diane had always been quiet, polite, reserved. The kind of woman who didn't say more than necessary and always made sure she brought a pie to every backyard cookout. She wasn't someone who reached out unless it mattered. I replied with a simple when and where we met at a diner halfway between Spokane and Coeur d'Alene. It was the kind of place with cracked leather booths and too much sugar on the tables. She looked different, stronger somehow, like someone who'd weathered a storm and come out the other side not untouched, but wiser. She wore no wedding ring, no makeup, just a flannel shirt, jeans, and the kind of look that said she was here to put truth on the table, not memories. "Thanks for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. She nodded. Wayne was always good at hiding the worst parts of himself. That wasn't how I expected this to start. I thought we'd dance around it, maybe ease into the conversation, but Diane didn't waste time. She pulled a manila envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. "You need to see this." Inside were printed emails, hundreds of them. Some were financial statements, others were messages between Wayne and Cheryl, ones I hadn't seen, ones dated over 2 years back. Hotel confirmations, gift orders, travel receipts. It didn't just prove the affair, it proved it had been going on far longer than I thought. I flipped through in silence. One message in particular made my hands stiffen. "You don't have to worry about Ron. He'll never see it coming." I looked up at Diane, jaw tight. "How did you get these?" "He used our old laptop for years. Never wiped it clean after we divorced. I only found them recently when I booted it up for tax records." She hesitated before adding, "I left him because of what he did to me, but I stayed quiet about what I suspected he was doing to you." "Why now?" I asked. She took a breath. "Because you're the only person he ever truly feared, and because Cheryl called me 3 nights ago. That stopped me. She called you. She wanted to know if I ever regretted walking away, if I ever forgave him." I let out a dry laugh. "Did you know?" she said without flinching. "But I forgave myself for staying too long. That hit deeper than I wanted to admit. I'd been telling myself I stayed with Cheryl because of duty, because of Thomas, because of the business. But maybe the truth was simpler. I'd stayed because I didn't want to admit how much I'd already lost. If you've ever stayed too long in something that was already broken, let me know in the comments. What made you finally walk away? Or if you haven't yet, what's holding you back?" Diane leaned forward. "You weren't the only one he betrayed, Ron. There were others. Women. Business contacts. He had this habit of pushing boundaries and hoping charm would clean up the damage." I shook my head slowly, still processing it all. I spent 15 years thinking he was the most loyal man I knew. "He wasn't loyal," she said. "He was dependent. And when people like that feel you slipping away, they replace you before you even realize it." We parted without fanfare. No hugs, no promises to keep in touch. Just a mutual understanding between two people who survived the same storm from different sides of the fence. When I got back to the cabin that night, I didn't pour whiskey. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in the garage next to the Harley I'd been rebuilding and stared at that envelope like it was a tombstone for everything I used to believe. The worst part wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the lies. It was realizing how long people can smile in your face while planting the knife behind your back. That night I burned every page of those emails in the fire pit out back, not out of denial, but because I didn't need the proof anymore. I had something better now, closure. But just when I thought the past had finally released its grip, I got a phone call the next morning that pulled me right back into the fire. This time, it wasn't Cheryl. It wasn't Wayne. It was Thomas. And what he had to say stopped me cold. It was just after 7 a.m. when my phone rang. I was out back, tightening the fuel line on the Harley grease on my hands, coffee cooling beside me. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. Dad. It was Thomas. His voice wasn't panicked, but it wasn't normal either. I didn't want to text this, he said. I need to tell you something. Face to face would have been better, but it can't wait. I sat down on the workbench, wiping my hands on a rag. What is it I ran into Mom last night? He said. That froze me. I hadn't spoken to Cheryl since she left the cabin. As far as I knew, she was still in Seattle, doing her best to start over. I figured whatever she did from here on out was her own burden to carry. Was it planned, I asked. No. I was at that Thai place near campus. She walked in, alone. She looked tired. I didn't say anything. I let him continue. She saw me, came over. We talked for a while. Nothing heavy. Then she said something that I can't shake. I waited, stomach tightening. She said she's thinking of coming back. Not to you. To Spokane. She said she misses what we had. Misses family. Said everything with Wayne was a mistake. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, jaw clenched. What did you say to her? I didn't know what to say. He admitted. I just listened. But she said she wanted to talk to you. Said she's not asking for forgiveness. Just 5 minutes. That was the moment I realized closure isn't always a locked door. Sometimes it's someone pounding on it from the other side, refusing to let go. Did she say why, now she said Wayne left? Thomas said quietly. Packed up and moved back to Boise. Said he's broke, burned out, and she hasn't heard from him in 2 months. So that was it. When the dream dried up, she turned back toward what was familiar. Toward the man who never stopped showing up. I should have been furious, but I wasn't. I wasn't even surprised. Let me ask you something. What would you do if the person who broke your world came back asking for a sliver of it again? Would you listen? Would you slam the door? Drop a comment? I want to know how you'd handle that kind of moment. I told Thomas I needed time to think. He respected that. Said he'd stay out of it. He always knew how to keep his heart open and his judgment in check. Something I didn't learn until I was well into my 50s. That afternoon I took a drive. No destination, just open road. Sometimes a man needs distance to think straight. I passed the Ironwood yard, now wearing the Drift Shade banner, and kept going until I found myself parked in front of the old one-bedroom apartment Cheryl and I had lived in during the early days. The place still looked the same. Cracked stucco rust around the window frames, same mailbox with crooked numbers. I remembered us eating ramen on a card table, sharing dreams we couldn't afford. I remembered Cheryl rubbing my shoulders after 12-hour shifts, telling me I was going to build something great. And I remembered believing her because she said it like she already saw it. Not all memories are lies. Some are just unfinished stories. I drove back as the sun was going down headlights, catching the pine along the back roads. The house was quiet, peaceful, but now the silence was heavier. Cheryl's possible return stirred something in me I didn't expect conflict. Later that night, I sat on the porch again with my journal. I used to write when I couldn't sleep. I hadn't picked up a pen in months, but this time I needed to. Not for her, for me. She says she doesn't want forgiveness, just a conversation. But forgiveness isn't something I give to make her feel better. It's something I give when I no longer need the wound. I don't know if I'm there yet. But maybe hearing her out doesn't mean opening the door. Maybe it just means locking it myself, once and for all. I closed the book, stared out into the dark. The wind had picked up. The fire pit flickered. And I realized maybe the hardest part of healing isn't what you've been through, it's choosing not to go through it again when it comes back dressed as regret. The next morning I called her. Just one ring. She answered, breath catching like she hadn't expected me to do it. You've got 5 minutes, I said. Use them well. And as I waited for her to speak, I realized this wasn't about what she'd say. It was about what I was finally ready to hear. ChatGPT Junoi. The line was quiet for a second, and then Cheryl exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. "Thank you," she said softly, like I'd done her a favor just by picking up. I didn't say anything back. I just waited. If she wanted 5 minutes, I wasn't going to fill them for her. She cleared her throat. "I don't expect anything from you. Not forgiveness, not understanding. I just need to say something out loud." "Then say it," I told her. I ruined everything she said. Not just the marriage. I ruined you, our son, our history. I know that. The honesty in her voice was unsettling. It wasn't manipulative, it wasn't theatrical. It was quiet and raw, and that's what made it hit harder than any screaming match ever could. "I don't know when I started lying to you," she continued. "I think it started before the affair, the smiles, the half-conversations. I was lonely, and instead of talking to you, I just drifted." I didn't interrupt, not because I agreed, but because this wasn't about debate. This was about finality. "I thought Wayne made me feel seen," she said, but all he did was distract me from the person I was too afraid to face. Me, not you. I leaned back in my chair, phone to my ear, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. "So why call now?" I finally asked. "Because I don't want to carry this into the next part of my life," she said, "and I don't want you to either. Have you ever been on the receiving end of an apology that came years too late? One that somehow hurt and healed at the same time? Drop a comment and tell me, did it change anything for you, or did it just remind you of the damage?" Cheryl paused. "You were always good to me, Ron. Even when you were working too much, even when I was drifting away. You never stopped building things. I just wish I'd realized that while I still had a place beside you." Those words didn't make me angry. They didn't make me hopeful. They just confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about release, about letting go of what we both knew was long dead. "You've said your piece," I told her. "What you do with it now is up to you. But I'm not walking back into a burning house just because it's quiet now." "I understand," she said, and I believed her. We said goodbye. No promises, no maybe someday. Just silence at the end of a road we both helped build and tear down. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while, letting the stillness wrap around me. No more questions. No more what-ifs. Just the kind of quiet that comes after a hard winter finally breaks. Later that afternoon, I took the Harley out for a ride. The first real ride since I'd started restoring it. It wasn't perfect, still needed some fine-tuning, but it roared to life in a way that felt symbolic, like something buried in dust and neglect had remembered what it was made for. I rode out along the river through the old back roads where Cheryl and I used to drive on weekends, when we didn't have enough money for dinner out, but still needed to get away from the world. The trees were thicker now. The road had cracks where it used to be smooth. Time does that. But the sky was still the same. About halfway through the ride, I stopped at a turnout and just stood there, helmet under my arm, sun on my face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not because everything had healed, but because I had stopped expecting it to. Sometimes peace isn't the absence of pain. Sometimes it's just the moment you stop handing your future to people who weren't built to carry it. So let me ask you, what have you been holding on to that you know you should let go of? And more importantly, what are you finally ready to start building just for you? As I got back on the bike and started the engine again, I realized the next part of my life didn't have to be big or loud. It just had to be mine. And as I turned toward home, the sun behind me and the road wide open ahead, I felt something return. Not the past, not the marriage, not the man I used to be, but something even better. control. The days that followed that final phone call with Cheryl felt different. Not dramatic. Not like something had shifted in the universe. Just cleaner. Lighter. Like I'd finally cleared the rubble after a storm I didn't ask for, but somehow survived. I got back into a rhythm early mornings, working on the Harley managing operations for Drift Shade's new equipment division. It was quieter work than before, but with a clearer purpose. The business no longer felt like a battlefield. It was a tool again, just one of many I used to rebuild my life. A week later, I was invited to speak at a small industry roundtable in Spokane. Nothing flashy, just a gathering of local contractors, project managers, and business owners sharing stories about longevity and lessons learned. I almost turned it down. I wasn't much for public speaking, and I wasn't sure I had anything to say that hadn't already been written into the calluses on my hands. But something told me to go. I stood in front of a room of about 40 people, mostly men in flannel shirts and steel-toe boots, the kind who work until their backs give out and their kids graduate debt-free. I didn't bring slides. I didn't write notes. I just told them the truth. I spent 15 years building a company with my best friend, I said. I spent another 15 years trying to be a husband to someone who stopped seeing me, and I lost both of them in the same year. That got quiet nods. Some looked away, others leaned in. But I didn't lose everything. I continued, because when you strip away the noise, what's left is you. The man you are when no one's watching. That's what you have to build from. That's your foundation. The highlight of that speech wasn't the applause. At the end, it was the guy who came up to me afterward. Late 60s, hands like weathered leather. He said, I found my wife cheating on me back in '89. I didn't talk about it for 30 years. Tonight I finally feel like someone understands. That right there was the moment I knew none of this pain had been wasted. If you've ever gone through something that nearly broke you, but came out the other side stronger, I want to hear your story. Comment below and tell me how you got through, because you never know who needs to hear it. That night I drove back to the cabin a different kind of full, not from the compliments, but from connection. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the guy who got cheated on. I felt like the guy who made it through, the guy who didn't lose his name in the fire. Later, I found myself scrolling through old photos, not out of sadness, but out of curiosity. I saw pictures of Thomas as a kid sitting on my shoulders at the state fair. Cheryl in the early days, genuine smiles, hand in mine, not yet complicated by everything life would throw at us. And Wayne beer in hand, standing next to me in front of our first company truck. I didn't delete them. I didn't toss them out like garbage. I closed the album and placed it back on the shelf. Because sometimes healing isn't erasing the past. It's learning how to store it without letting it define you. The next morning, Thomas called again. Said he was thinking of coming up for the weekend. Not just for dinner this time. He wanted to help finish the Harley. I think we should take it out together when it's done, he said. I agreed instantly. That bike had become more than just a project. It was a timeline, a symbol of everything I put off while I was busy saving a marriage that didn't want saving, and a business I almost lost to betrayal. Now, it was becoming a bridge. Between me and my son, between who I was and who I was becoming. And that Sunday when he pulled into the driveway with 2 helmets under his arm and grease already on his jeans, I knew we were heading toward something good. We worked for hours, adjusting the timing, tuning the carburetor, replacing the brake lines. The garage smelled like oil and steel and second chances. When we finally rolled the Harley out onto the driveway and fired it up, the engine rumbled low and steady, like it had been waiting its whole life to breathe again. Thomas climbed on behind me. I looked over my shoulder and said, "You sure?" He nodded. "Let's go." As we pulled out onto the open road, wind in our faces and the past behind us, I realized that no matter how broken things had gotten, no matter how much was lost, something else had survived. Me. And the road ahead. A year ago, I thought I had everything figured out, a steady marriage, a thriving business, a best friend I trusted, like a brother. But sometimes the life you think you're building turns out to be scaffolding for something else entirely. When it all came crashing down, I thought I'd lost everything. I didn't realize then that losing what wasn't real was the only way I'd ever find what truly was. I've learned that betrayal doesn't define you, how you respond to it does. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't seek revenge in the way people expect. I took a slow, steady approach. I protected what mattered, honored what was left, and let go of what was already gone. And in doing so, I didn't just reclaim my future, I rebuilt it, not just with money or business wins, but with clarity, with the peace that comes from knowing I kept my dignity when I could have lost it, trying to get even. I used to think strength was about pushing through, but real strength, I've found, is in knowing when to stop carrying people who would never lift you. My son and I ride that old Harley now on Sundays, not every week, but often enough to remind me that some relationships survive the fire and even grow stronger because of it. Cheryl moved on. So did Wayne. Their choices carved out their path. Mine carved out mine. And where I stand today on my own land with clean air in my lungs and nothing left to hide, I can honestly say I'm grateful, not for the pain, but for the clarity it brought. If this story hit you in a place you didn't expect, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ashes, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below and share your story. You never know who it might help. And if this kind of real-life storytelling speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because it helps me, but because stories like this are what remind us we're not alone. There's a place here for truth, for healing, and for starting over one chapter at a time.